Hi, I'm Brit Garner.
And I'm Rob Spall.
Welcome to Nature Insight.
Speed dating with the future.
It's time for episode 3 of our newest season. This is where we have the chance to offer you backstage passes to the science and policy of biodiversity, with unique perspectives from those on the front lines of research and action for nature.
So in our last episode, Brit, we examined the idea of the nexus.
Which honestly sounds a bit like a science fiction double feature to me.
If only. As we know, in fact, the nexus is shorthand for the interconnections between biodiversity, water, food, health, and climate change. But it's also the focus of a landmark new IPBES assessment report. And in a similar vein, hundreds of IPBES experts have been working for 3 years now on a report about transformative change. Specifically, the kinds of system change that's needed across economies and societies if we're really serious about wanting a more just and sustainable world.
I gotta be honest, I am so excited that IPBES has 2 massive reports coming out. It's just the culmination of so many years of work and hundreds and thousands of experts. And what an exciting time. And transformative change is certainly a piece of achieving these goals that have been laid out in something like the IPBES Global Assessment or in other intergovernmental panels and organizations and policy like climate change or sustainable development goals. But really at the end of the day, what is it? How do we go about achieving it? And how do we apply it over to these huge problems facing ourselves and nature?
So, Brit, you were talking about the 2019 IPBES Global Assessment report. And the Global Assessment had actually defined transformative change as fundamental system-wide changes across economies, societies, and technologies. But the Transformative Change Assessment goes further than that. It builds on that definition, and it talks about those types of changes at that kind of scale, but that are needed for a more just and sustainable world.
To really understand what transformative change is, maybe we should start with an example of what it is on a local level and what it can achieve. Dr. Janita Gurung worked on IPBES's Transformative Change Assessment, but she typically concentrates on projects in Nepal and works with protecting and regenerating forests and plants. She's a program lead for governance and rights at RECOFTC, which is an organization that works with people and forest. She began by telling me how she ended up working in this specific subject area.
Because I was working in the mountains a lot, I really was drawn very much to snow leopards. But then there was an experience that kind of made me get off track of wildlife. I had traveled to this very high mountain area in the area called Mount Kanchenjunga, so it's the 3rd highest mountain in the world. And I was walking along, I think it was like quite close to a glacier. And then I saw footprints. And I thought it was snow leopard prints, but I think it was just some another animal, like a fox perhaps. And I started following it. And at an altitude of about, I think it was over 4,000 meters, right? And then it went round and round and round, and it came back to the place where I started. And I was exhausted. And I was, oh no, this is not something I can do. It's beyond my energy level. And then I started to fix better on trees and plants. And I also had a cousin who was a medicinal plant expert. And I used to travel with him. And it was just amazing to hear all these stories about the benefits of certain plants, what they do, what they're useful for. Not certain plants, I think I should say almost every plant that he would come across. I could relate much more to plants and trees and things on the ground that moved a little less than wildlife, actually. So I think now it's very apt that I'm working with forests and people.
I'd love to study you, but the whole walking in circles at altitude is really just not my cup of tea. If we could just stay rooted, that'd be great. You mentioned forests and plants and trees, and I think that some of these are probably the best examples that we can think of when it comes to management of populations and even transformative change. If I were to try to explain transformative change as a concept, let's say to my students, a group of undergraduates studying ecology, What's an example I could use to really illustrate that?
So, Nepal is a mountainous country, but of course, we have lots and lots of forests. Lots of people are dependent on forests. But in the 1970s, actually, we were heading towards disaster because we were just using our forests very badly, managing them very badly, overusing them. And we had lost a huge percentage of our forests. So the estimates are that the forest cover in our country at that time was about 26%. But then forests are really important to people, right? So we use forests for daily purposes. So people use fuel wood to cook food. We used timber to build our houses, leaves that fall on the ground. That's taken by villagers back home as litter for their livestock. So it's the bedding that the livestock sleep on. And then ultimately that just decays, and then that's taken as manure for agriculture. So there's a lot of use that we have from forests. But just because we were using them so badly, we were losing a lot of the forest. But then if you look at the forest cover now in our country, it's about 50 years later, we have increased our forest cover to about 45%. And if you look at just the number, that I would say is change, right? So the forest cover changed from 25% to 45%. But what's transformative about it is all of the other processes that went into making that change. So one of the most important things is that the management of forests was given to the communities. So this involved a lot of changes within the government sector to allow this to happen. So whether it's the policies that allowed this to happen, and then also empowering the communities to manage it in a way that they felt ownership of these resources and that they could manage it for future generations. Basically, it's the way things were organized, how communities governed and managed the forest. So all of this changed, and that's what makes this change transformative. And also one of the other things about transformative is that it's a lot of people who came together to allow this change to happen, to make this change happen. So there was the government, of course, and then there's also the communities, but then not forgetting all the other people who played a role. So whether it's scientists who are studying these forests and people who are training communities to learn new things, new techniques, and also a lot of donor communities coming together and supporting, because this takes a lot of money. So everyone coming together and making this change happen is what's transformative about the whole process.
Have you encountered anything where there has been change not only in the process leading up to something, but perhaps in what happens next?
Change is a dynamic thing. So it's not the end. So we've reached 45% forest cover. That's a wow. But that's not the end, because at a certain point, you get so attached to the forest being there that you forget to use it for other purposes. You just want it there as a forest. But then forests have many other purposes. So yes, we have a very successful story with community forestry in our country, but there's also news coming about that some forests are very stagnant. They are being preserved rather than being conserved. So I also like these two words, because preservation means, just keeping it there. But conservation to me has that connotation of, yes, a little bit of preservation, but also using it sustainably so that that use can be taken forward into the future.
Right. We bring in the human component.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I think there is a little bit of that happening to some of the forests here. And so we need to change and adapt to this process as well.
Just like any ecosystem, there's a role to be played, and there is evolution constantly, if nothing else. Change is the only known entity. Just like transformative change, these things are constantly adapting and responding to the needs and reality of the time, because everything is linked. It's so clear how passionate you are about these things and how positive your outlook seems to be, these experiences. I'm just curious, how are some of the lessons of what you've seen working with transformative change able to be applied elsewhere?
Actually, Brit, one of the things that working on this transformative change assessment, I realized is that a lot of us work on transformative change actions, but we do not know that it's transformative change. It's my first IPBES assessment. And this IPBES assessment is, I understand it's a little different because there's a lot of social science around it. The other IPBES assessments have very much natural sciences around it. So just understanding that this has been a transformative change process itself is very important to me, who has a natural science upbringing. Like, there are many things we do, but we don't think of it as being transformative. So just for example, increasing forest cover. So you could just bring a group of people and have someone plant seedlings, right? And in 20 years, they'll have grown up into a forest. But then that's so different than working with communities, which is very natural for us here in our part of the world. We do a lot of work with communities. And knowing that this process is transformative, there are certain aspects about transformative change that is embedded within this process. I think that understanding is very important, especially for people working in the conservation sector.
So the transformative change assessment itself is an example of transformative change. How wonderful.
Yes, especially for me, yeah.
Brit, I loved the interview, and I particularly enjoyed the parts where Janita talked about how things we might be doing anyway might actually be transformative and we don't even realize it. Perhaps we need to think about the kinds of changes we are achieving in our lives, in our communities, in our organizations, and then try and work out how much real potential those have to be reproduced at other scales, possibly in other contexts, for transformative work.
Yes, and what's so exciting is that I think this report is going to start us off on that journey. This is going to give us the tools and kind of the framework to start thinking about scaling and to think about contexts that maybe weren't really front of mind. And that for me is what's really exciting about this, thinking about what happens next.
We've had some great local insights from Janita, and she's helped make the idea of transformative change appealing and understanding to all of us. And you're going to take us on a broader global journey now, right?
Yes, it is indeed time to look at this more so on the global scale and to really address this question of the assessment, which is how can you address a global challenge and make it transformative, even given how overwhelming this all can be? One person who is definitely qualified to answer these questions is Professor Lucas Garibaldi, who, in his own words, has worked day and night voluntarily on the assessment.
He's one of the 3 co-chairs, right?
Yes, exactly. And when not working on this report, Lucas teaches at the National University of Rio Negro in Argentina, where he specializes in species interactions and agricultural ecology. So for him, what characterizes transformative change?
Transformative change is about quality of change. So we can produce food, we can produce commodities in a different way, in a way that conserve the environment and create synergies instead of environmental destruction. So the most important aspect of transformative change is the quality of the change. That would be the critical aspect.
What are the possible downsides of not achieving this? What are the stakes of something like this not happening?
Well, it is very clear that we are facing multiple crises of biodiversity loss and nature decline, but also climate change and also crises of inequality. And all these crises are interconnected. And this is one of the critical aspects of the transformative change assessment that connects people and nature, connects ecological process with social process. And we have seen that current efforts to halt biodiversity loss are, of course, positive, but they are not enough. And we need a quality of change. We need to do something that tackles the underlying causes of these crises. And this is what transformative change is about. And what we have seen is that the cost of inactions are much higher than the cost of actions. So we need to move, and we need to move fast, because the environmental problems that we are having And the biodiversity loss that we are facing, it's happened very rapidly. And this, as we have seen, is having problems all over the world in terms of extreme climatic events, in terms of soil degradation, diseases, and many different aspects.
For you personally, why is this a project you wanted to be a part of? What about transformative change or the transformative change assessment really spoke to you as an individual or as a practitioner or researcher or scientist?
I am a scientist, but also a practitioner from the agricultural perspective. So I have been working in transformative change without knowing it because it's a kind of a new term, but the things that we have been promoting on land, on territories, they are very well aligned with the principles of transformative change and what transformative change is about. So transformative change is happening, that is feasible, and that we can obtain results very positive in less than 10 years. And this is something very, very important. So if we are committed, we can do it. And we have been showing this with different communities in different farming places, in different places of the world. There are also many good examples with the local fishers and how they organize into communities, into have better fishing skills, better social relations, better profit that is more equal distributed among the different people, how their traditional fishing is better recognized by the consumers so that they are eating a good quality of food, and this can be translated into better prices for these people, how they take decisions, how they ecologically they don't overfish the places where they live and work, how they monitor the fishes and the seafood, etc. So I think there are many examples where people and nature can thrive together and different approaches to transformative change. Each one of these examples are not perfect and not ideal, but they have transformative potential and they are in this process. Transformative change is a process, so it is kind of a never-ending story based on the principles of transformative change that account for justice and equity and inclusion, and also this interconnectedness that we have been talking about. We transit this process into a learning history of adaptation and improvement.
I also have to think that with that many different stories and perspectives, certainly there must have been challenges trying to have people come together in this way from so many different regions and places and faces and spaces. So can you share with us some of those challenges or maybe moments that stood out to you about this?
The transformative change assessment is the first assessment of transformative change all over the world. So this was a massive experience of dialogue between different disciplines, but the transformative change assessment faced a lot of challenges and a lot of good and nice challenges that happen when you're doing novel things. And this was a really important dialogue and also an exercise of tolerance and of open mind. Because, for example, when I have, as a scientist, I have many publications and books, and I love science. It's kind of the path of my life. So I'm usually very confident about my discipline. And when I came to the transformative change assessment, it was kind of being naked because it was about the dialogues of many different disciplines, and you cannot solve it only in one discipline. So it was kind of also work with my fears, with making mistakes and things that did not happen to me before in the previous two assessments, like the global assessment or the pollination assessment. Because in the global assessment, I was also coordinating a chapter, but the chapter that was mostly related to my knowledge. And in the pollination assessment, it was also the same. But here was something completely different, with people that think completely different in sometimes. I love quantitative aspects, and some people did not want to see any numbers. so
Sounds like my students.
okay.
I love what you said about feeling scientifically naked in a way that really resonates with me. I went through that when I took my first humanities social science course. I took philosophy of ecology while I was working on wildlife biology components of dissertation. And I came into it as someone that had a very, what I considered to be scientific and rigorous understanding of ecology. And I spent that semester completely unraveling and demolishing all of my foundations because I was forced to ask the questions of, why do I think that this is the case? Just because I read it somewhere? Just because I published on it? And I was in that class with environmental philosophy graduate students, and the kind of growth that I had just having them ask me questions, I'm just so thankful for the whole rest of my life to start thinking about these things. You were saying kind of similarly how you came in with this confidence and then had something totally different happen. What's an example of something that maybe challenged you or that you learned that you hadn't been thinking about before?
Well, so many things. And it was also especially challenging because in terms of social science, each word is really important. So it was really difficult to speak basically, because some things that when you come into the transformative change assessment, each word that you're saying is critically analyzed.
Totally.
And it means different things. So I have learned the love also for concepts, for the language, but also at the same time we have some people that they know a lot about social processes but didn't know many basic things about life on Earth or ecology, and that was really nice how to interact. Or sometimes we go to have a meeting in a place that is, for example, an institute of natural science, and there is a big chart of a silkweed fly in the wall. And many people say, Lucas, see, there is a bee. And it's not a bee, it's a silkweed fly. So, so those moments I felt a little bit better. Okay, I know things.
Isn't it so funny? We get back to our comfort zone. All right, I know what a bee is. We're good to go.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. So much sharing back and forth. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And this is what transformative change is about. Transformative change is not about bringing all the world into one direction. It's to understand that there are multiple visions that can live together and that there are multiple pathways that brings you to transformative change. So it's embracing diversity, being tolerant and peaceful.
So if you imagined that it's a couple years from now, the report has been launched, has been out for a while, people have discussed it, it's been considered. For you, what does success look like from this amazing, huge undertaking of multiple years and hundreds of people coming together?
For me, success will be implementation of the transformative change principles by each one of the actors. For example, for governments, the measurements of success for the country are not only related with short-term material gains or GDP, but also involve other indices that take into account social justice, equity, how people is doing in terms of happiness, in terms of health. For individual people, how people is more also healthy and happy, eating better food, being more friendly with other people, being more open to different ideas. For the science, how this transformative change assessment can help to understand the social ecological systems to try to promote these transitions to a better world. So So for me, success will be implementation and, of course, further development, because as we said, this assessment is the first one on this topic. It was a great effort. It was very, very important, but it's not the end. So it will be nice that people take this as a very important first step that we can further improve.
We know how to do it. It's just time to scale it up and reproduce it according to what we need locally.
Yes.
One of the thoughts that I had while listening to Lucas is how difficult it must be for an author or an expert to talk broadly about a report that they're working on, but not be able to share any of the actual specific findings yet because it hasn't been launched. So kudos for finding ways of talking around the findings about what's actually important.
Yes, Lucas was an absolute rock star at talking to us while not talking to us in all that he was able to do, and we are super appreciative.
I think it's important, having heard the enthusiasm and the optimism that Lucas and his team obviously have, having worked on this report for 3 years, to also say that they've been quite realistic about the chances of fully implementing transformative change. They've looked at things like what kinds of obstacles, what sort of barriers would prevent the kind of change that they've said is necessary.
And I think that just like with transformative change operating on multiple levels, many of those might just be in our personal level, those day-to-day sort of behavioral patterns even. It's not necessarily what a government does. It can be these smaller pieces.
Our habits and our usual routines could certainly be a barrier to making transformative change, in addition to vested interests who obviously have a significant interest in keeping the status quo. There are a bunch of other types of barriers, things like the ability to access decision-making power, the ability to be part of nature rather than seeing nature as something to be dominated and separated from nature with humanity. So all of these things, I think, are important considerations to ensure that when we approach something like transformative change, it's not entirely starry-eyed and somewhat idealistic, but a very realistic look at the kinds of change that are necessary but possible as well.
Absolutely.
What stood out for you about the interview?
Honestly, I'm sure you could hear it in the interview, just the kind of excitement I get at this idea of being naked within your discipline, of restructuring things you thought you knew, of coming into a space with no confidence. I think there is something so powerful in humility. I think it's what lets us learn more. I think it's what lets us then do better at the things that we do. And that's not just within academic spheres. So it was just so awesome to hear him talk about that from this amazing interdisciplinary transformative change assessment perspective.
I kept thinking while I was listening to the interview about the barriers between disciplines and how in many cases the barriers are relatively constructed and not particularly valuable in any way. As a communications expert and a communications professional, I'm working constantly day in and day out at IPBES with scientists, ecologists, people who are particularly versed and strong in the natural sciences. And it really is clear to me that there's so much to learn, but also to contribute from other disciplines like communications and bringing that into conservation, bringing that into environmental issues is transformative. You know, we're talking again after Janita's interview about finding the things that you do that are transformative. It really, I think, echoes with a lot of what Lucas was saying as well.
Oh, absolutely. And as someone who's passionate about and works within interdisciplinary spaces, it is just so awesome to think about this happening at the global scale for people, for nature, for life on Earth. And I, for one, cannot wait to see this transformative change assessment and am so thankful to everyone who made something like this happen. That's it for this episode of Nature Insight, Speed Dating with the Future. I'm Brit Garner.
And I'm Rob Spall. On our next episode, we're going to be talking about ugly species. Why are some species beloved and even considered to be celebrities? Think about pandas, rhinos, polar bears, while many others are often overlooked or even actively disliked, often based just on their looks. And what are the implications for biodiversity and conservation of this beauty contest in the natural world?
And in the meantime, you can learn more about IPBES's work on www.ipbes.net or on any of their social media channels. Just search for @IPBES. That's @IPBES. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back after the festive season in the third week of January. Happy holidays to all of you from all of us behind the mic. Join us again in 2025 for more nature insight, speed dating with the future.